Hello and welcome back to the Raspberry 8 podcast. Today I am joined by Simon Shears. Simon is a fitness coach and an author. I met him out in Mallorca last year at a BJJ and yoga festival, and we got chatting a little bit, and he had a very interesting approach to sports in general and having a look at sport on a deeper level. His book, Working It Out, What Actually Makes Us Exercise, is a look at exercise through a sort of anthropological and human psychological perspective. So when our diaries lined up, I managed to get Simon over and have a chat to him. And I will say one thing, this is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting podcasts, and honestly, one of the most interesting things that I've ever come across in terms of reframing exercise, something that I've been doing for the majority of my life at this point quite seriously, and reframing it in a way that I've never looked at it before. So of all the podcasts I've ever recorded or indeed listened to, this is one of the most interesting, in my opinion. I think a real new perspective on everything, not just exercise, but everything in life. I'm bigging that up. That's a pretty big statement there, but I'm serious about it. So really enjoyed this episode, and I'll let Simon take the rest from there. I hope you guys enjoy this one. Check it out. Simon, Buzzy, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
We met last year at the Mallorca BJJ and Yoga Festival, and we got chatting. You gave me your book, and it instantly I thought that you would be a good podcast guest, because I think that you are approaching a topic that I find interesting, which is fitness in general from maybe a different perspective. Would you say that's accurate?
I think I'm trying to shift the narrative around exercise psychology and what it takes to exercise regularly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's before we get into that, sort of a little bit more of your own background. What is your history with in the sporting world?
Nothing too advanced. Multiple sports growing up. I played basketball at school in Dublin. We won the Dublin Championship. That's probably a highlight of my sporting career.
It was all downhill from there.
It was all downhill from there, yeah. We lost the All-Ireland final, unfortunately. And then I went to uni, played roller hockey in Scotland, played a lot of football in Scotland, played in the Fife League, which was a lot of fun, very violent and muddy. But it was great. And then worked on boats and was fit just because I was cleaning yachts. That was most of my day-to-day. And then got into CrossFit, probably thanks to a good friend of mine who was really into fitness. He became a good friend, and I sort of adopted a lot of his lifestyle, and I'm very grateful to him. And I sort of kept that up and became a CrossFit coach when I started writing the book, which was in Hamburg probably 8 years ago now.
Oh, wow.
But I just coached part-time if the gym I trained at needed a coach. And then became a full-time coach 3.5 years ago. I've also dabbled in things that my friend has done, like I did a half Ironman a few years ago and did a High Rocks last year, High Rocks race. So I do little things, but nothing high level. And
so that's a real eclectic mix of different sports. And we were talking earlier, we're doing training earlier. You've also recently competed in arm wrestling.
Yeah.
Again, very, very different sport. What is your driving force within sport, sort of in the sport/fitness world? Because, for example, myself, never interested in any sports growing up until I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then basically everything else all of the other physical stuff that I do, at the very core of it is still this idea that I'm training to be a stronger grappler. So for me, there's been one very particular focus the entire time. Has that been the case with you, or is it, it's such a broad, different selection of activities?
I think I enjoy using my body. So it's mainly just enjoying that feeling of competence. And then probably the reason I've changed so much is because I haven't been able to reach a higher level and probably allow my interest to drift elsewhere as my circumstances have changed, as my social world has changed, as if I changed school or university, and sort of then got into a sport that I could feel competent in and enjoy myself in and enjoy using my body. I think basketball is a great example of that. I was playing in Dublin, went to boarding school in Dublin, and then went to university in St Andrews full of Americans on a year abroad or whatever. And so suddenly it was a high level and I went to tryouts, and I can tell myself that I didn't like their attitude or whatever, but they were just a much higher level than me. And I got on the B team and I just thought, oh, I'll try something else where I could be a higher level, and I switched again. So that's probably the best answer I can give you. But enjoying using my body is probably the main reason.
Yeah, and I think that is something that I think as you get older especially, and when you go through, I've spoken to a few people about this recently, but you kind of don't appreciate what your body can do until you can't use it anymore. Like when I've had surgery, on the 2 occasions that I've been off the mat for months at a time, when I've had surgery or not being able to use my body how I want to, and then suddenly you go, I feel like that's one of the reasons why we've had such a crazy sort of kickback post-COVID, where suddenly everyone was locked inside of their house, and coming out of that and given the freedom to do stuff again. I feel like when I've spoken to jiu-jitsu instructors, they're on way more students than they had pre-COVID, even though if you looked at it on paper, you wouldn't expect that to be the case. Either it would take a long time to ramp back up, or people would be scared of that close contact. But it seems that people have been, after they had that sort of ability to do sports, exercise, be with people taken away, the comeback after that has been even greater.
Yeah. I mean, why do you think that is? Do you think it's just that one reason that because they were locked in, they weren't allowed to use their body? Or do you think it's also the fact that there was a high correlation between, health, obesity, and COVID deaths, and people thinking they need sport? I don't know the answer. I'm just curious.
It's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I don't know anyone who, I don't really know anyone who doesn't exercise very regularly. I don't have any friends who don't exercise.
Yeah.
I don't have any friends who exercise and health and their fitness is not a big part of their life. So I really can't relate, I don't think, to anyone who doesn't train. So I have no idea.
Yeah, I find that hard as well to empathize with someone who doesn't train regularly. And I think that's part of my issue with the fitness industry, is that the narrative comes from people who exercise regularly. And I find for myself, and speaking from the eye, it's like, I can just go out and train, and maybe I'll have a few days off, but then I'll get back into it quite easily. And I can't empathize with what it feels like for someone who has spent 10 years without doing any real exercise at all, and really struggling with health issues, find it really challenging to get going again, not able to do that. My, echo chamber and my community just doesn't have people like that. Even people I know who are unfit, they're still making an effort and going
They're
to
like
the gym.
the most unfit people at the CrossFit class.
Well, they're still like, they'll go out for a swim in the morning, and then maybe another day in the week they'll hit the gym.
Yeah.
And they'll do that, quite sporadically, but they're still making some sort of effort,
I sort of wonder whether any person listening to this podcast doesn't exercise in some form or other, at the very least. Like, I've met these mythical beings who don't ever exercise, and it does confuse me.
Well, I see them
a
lot, and I'm pretty confident I see them a lot. And to be honest, I feel like I see them when I come to the UK. It feels quite evident that there are people who just aren't exercising.
You're talking about fat
ever.
people?
Yeah, but it's not just overweight people.
Sure.
It's not. It's like, just...
Weak people?
Weak, yeah. Posture, way people move, way people carry themselves, way people walk. And
I mean, you could very well be describing someone who trains jiu-jitsu. Bad posture, can't move properly, walk funny.
Yeah, just doing the wrong discipline.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing though, because I think that not to go straight into why I wrote the book.
Yeah,
but here we are.
There's the segue.
Yeah, well, it's like the whole point is that there's a narrative is like, oh, you need to self-discipline. At the end of the day, you just got to do it, and I just think that's horseshit. I think there's so much more that goes into what makes it when I suddenly say, I'm going to train. It feels like I'm just saying, oh, I'm just going to do it. And I just did it. I just got up and I picked up my kettlebells and I started training, or I put on my running shoes and I ran out the door. It's easy. I just did it. It's like, nah. There's a whole load of forces that have come to me being able to make that decision in that moment. And it felt like it was myself and self-discipline. But the more I thought about what it is that make people exercise, the more I investigated that question, the deeper I went, the more I found like, nah, that's an illusion. It feels like self-discipline. it's not. And if we're going to have an honest conversation about getting more people to do more exercise, which I think is a really important thing, that's why I wrote the book. I base it on the premise that the world would be a better place if more people are exercising regularly, or if everyone is exercising regularly. I think everyone's going to be healthier, happier, psychologically healthier. You're just going to have stronger, healthier communities. Everything is going to be better from there. Yeah. So that's a fundamental premise of where I started at. And I said, well, how do you get more people to exercise regularly? Well, what is it that makes us exercise? And there's this panacea narrative that it's, well, at the end of the day, it's just self-discipline. You've got to do it. Some people have it, some people don't. And that leaves this massive amount of the population sitting there thinking, well, maybe I just don't have the self-discipline for exercise. Maybe I just don't like exercise. You know, I had a client who said to me, well, maybe I just don't like exercise. It's like, well, that's not how likes work. That's not how our interests work. Our interests are malleable. They're not fixed. They evolve over time, and they evolve based on social influence and constant stimuli, and that's how they change, and they do change. And yeah, I wanted to create a more honest, complete narrative of what it is that helps some people get up off the sofa and exercise, and some people think about exercise and not do it and go do something else. And yeah, I hope that more individuals who do exercise can take that on board when they're trying to encourage their friends to exercise regularly, who aren't exercising, or their family members, and I mean, obviously it's already an obvious kind of thing, because gym owners, like I run a fitness club, you've been involved with gyms. I don't know if you've owned a gym yet, but you know, you've been involved in getting clients to come back into the door and making them exercise regularly. You don't sit there as a manager and go, if you've got empty class, you don't sit there going, oh, all these bloody clients, they all lack self-discipline. No, you don't. You think about what's their experience in the gym, you know, how convenient it is for them to come. Is it affordable? Are they enjoying their experience? Are they feeling competent in the class? You know, are they getting benefits from a community? Is there a social reinforcement from the community? All these things are playing a role in creating client retention. And yet there's this sort of overarching sort of thing that I keep hearing on social media, on Instagram and on YouTube. It's like discipline. And it's like, what do you mean by discipline? And I don't want to sort of say, get rid of that, because it has its place. But I feel like it's the wrong language to be using. You know, I feel like we can have a more complete understanding of the psychology. We can understand what happens when someone says to me, if some powerful, dominant male man says to me, come on, man, show some discipline. I have an emotional reaction. And I have an emotional reaction, and I'll produce some dopamine, and then I'll have more energy to go and do whatever activities I'm doing. So it has its place. I will have a reaction to that and do some exercise in that moment by hearing that word discipline. But that's a stimulus. That's an external stimulus that I'm receiving from a community, from someone who's entrenched in a community. Anyway, it has its place, but I feel like there's a bigger conversation to be had about how we can help people do more exercise.
And sort of through your research and through the writing of the book and stuff like that, what are the main takeaways? What are the main points to answer that question?
The main points are, well, if it was going to be useful, I would say you need to make it as convenient as possible. And I break that down to 4 categories. You've got to make, whichever activity you want to take up, you've got to make sure that the resources for that activity, because obviously it was the hardest. One of the hardest things about the book is that sports and disciplines and exercises vary widely.
Yeah.
Okay. But most activities, or nearly all activities, they'll have some resources involved with them. Even if that resource is an open floor. If you're doing yoga, you need an open floor, right? Okay. If you're just doing some calisthenics or some freeletics, you need an open floor.
Yeah.
Right. So there's resources. So you want to make sure that those resources are nearby. Okay, nearby your place of work. You don't want to be expending too much energy before you start exercising. At the end, it becomes a complete balance, and I have lots of scales in my book if you look through it, and it's a balance between expectation of neurological reward, which is essentially dopamine, and how much energy it's going to cost us. Well, the exercise itself is going to take us a lot of energy, right? Any more energy that we have to expend before that is going to tip the scales in favor of, well, my nervous system is going to say, this is not a good use of my energy. It's too much energy. I'm going to go do something else. So we want to make it as nearby as possible. That's a convenience factor. We want to make sure it's affordable, and there's different ways of making it feel affordable. So, for example, people who have a pay per class gym, or you pay per class when you go to the gym, or you go to a class, and you think, okay, well, I'm going to get benefits from this exercise, but I don't really want to do it. It's going to take a lot of energy. There's some neurological reward, but it's going to take a lot of energy. Oh, and I have to spend £10 on it. Oh, it's going to tip the scales.
I've already spent £80 for the month.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or if I don't go, I'm going to lose money. Oh, that's going to help tip the scales. So a study I reference in the book is one of 1,800 gym members called Paying Not to Go to the Gym, which is the old traditional gym model. It's let's get loads of signups in January, and then they'll pay for the year, and then they'll never come. And if they did all come, we wouldn't be able to accommodate them.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. But they found that people who paid for membership monthly, it was new members, but members who paid monthly were 17% more likely to make exercise a habit. So I pretty much only offer monthly memberships to my fitness club, and I do that for me, but I do that for them because I know that they're going to make more of a habit for that very reason. It's going to tip the scales in favor of, if I don't go, I'm going to lose money. I suppose if I do go, I'm going to lose money. So there's different ways we can make adjustments to the setup, the environment, to help us do more regular exercise, and that's just one example. But the three basic things are: make it convenient, so proximity, availability, make sure that it's available when you're available. And a big factor for that I found is timing consistency, hugely overlooked by so many coaches and gym businesses, is just make sure the classes are consistently the same time, the same day of the week, because people build a routine around, and it seems so obvious. I can go into detail for each one of these points, but maybe we can come back. So proximity, availability, price, and just general accessibility. If it's awkward, it's like you just said a minute ago. Yeah. You wanted to use one of your...
if I want to use a piece of equipment,
you make it more accessible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't make a habit out of it. And so it's obvious stuff, but it was partly giving a clear framework. So consider proximity, availability, price, accessibility. I gave it an acronym, PAPA. And that's making sure it's as convenient as possible. We're not creatures of self-discipline. We're creatures of convenience. So make it as convenient as possible.
That's why I say it's one of the pieces of advice I give to people who ask me what gym they should go to. And I go, the reality is the gym that you should go to is one that's convenient to you. If you think there's a better gym and it's 45 minutes away, and there's a slightly worse gym that's 20 minutes or 10 minutes away, go to the one that's 10 minutes away, because you're going to go there a lot more, and ultimately it's going to be more beneficial.
And it applies across the board. The problem is that, one of the fittest guys I know, I don't know if he's still going as regularly because he's gone off to work on a boat, but he's in his early 60s. But he got obsessed with CrossFit. Obsessed. And, you saw a photo of him 5 years earlier, and he was pint in the hand, really overweight, got obsessed with CrossFit, and he was top CrossFit athletes who were in their 20s. He was doing the same, his knees were kind of gone. But in terms of the conditioning work on the rower and on the skiing machine and so on, he was an absolute animal. And he would drive 40 minutes to go to the gym every day. But, he was...
he needs motivation.
But no. But the thing is he was single. He would work and then, have his free time. And he didn't have a family around him. He was living in Mallorca. And so he could make that 40-minute drive. And that's the problem. You've got to think, okay, that's the exception. And why is the exception? What are the other parameters? It's not just one thing is going to make you go to the gym. It's when we add all these things together, it's going to make it way more likely that we're going to be going to the gym or doing the regular exercise. So, make it convenient. It sounds obvious, but it will make a difference. And, and there's plenty of examples in the book about how that happens. I talk about... Australia's success in the Olympics in swimming, and how they've got, 200 gold medals or 200 medals in swimming in the Olympics, which is obviously way higher, for the demographic, for the population density. And they've got, why is that? Why is Australia so successful at swimming? And they've got way more swimming pools per capita than any other country. And it's just, it's really convenient. They're in the pool all the time. So convenient. And then one that's overlooked and hugely overlooked is the importance of guidance. So if our nervous system doesn't know what to do and how to do it, it's not going to do it. And we can start to paint a more complex picture, a more detailed picture of the psychology. Our nervous system is constantly, I feel like I'm going a bit deep at the beginning,
No, go.
But basically it's like, I'm going to expend X amount of energy in this exercise, and I'm going to get Y amount of neurological reward from doing it. Okay, whatever those rewards are, and we could talk about those in a minute, but I'm going to get some sort of reward. Maybe it's oxytocin, serotonin, endorphin, anandamide, right? Okay, and all those are coupled with dopamine. But our nervous system is constantly checking how guaranteed that reward is. It's like, well, okay, so I know that I'm going to do a workout now, and I know that there's some reward. Okay, but am I guaranteed that reward? Well, okay, I know exactly what to do and how to do it. Well, if I know exactly what to do and how to do it, I know that I'm going to do 5 sets of 5 bench press or whatever, and I'm going to come out, feel, pumped and feel like I've achieved my goal for the day. Fantastic. That reward is there. I know exactly I'm doing 5 sets of 5 on the bench. I know where the bench is. I know it's in my garage. Okay, my nervous system is saying, okay, the reward is there. But if we don't know what to do and how to do it, our nervous system starts to say, well, hold on, how guaranteed is this reward? And then suddenly that starts to think, okay, well, hold on, the reward isn't so guaranteed. So there's also that measure of, okay, well, if it's not so guaranteed, well, I'm going to go do something else and find something that has more, guaranteed reward.
So is your sort of neurological system going to try and drive you away from exercise, or is more likely to drive you away from exercise if that reward isn't guaranteed?
Yeah, it's for anything, but if the reward isn't guaranteed, then it's going to think, okay, well, how much energy am I going to expend? So the start of the book, I frame everything in terms of energy. And our nervous system, we've evolved to conserve energy, right? Which makes perfect sense. Evolutionarily speaking, it's hard to find food. It's hard to attain energy, okay? So we have to expend energy to get energy. We have to expend energy to find a mate, and we have to expend energy to socialize because we're successful as a social mammal. But it was hard to go and attain that energy, all right? So our nervous system has evolved to make sure that we only expend energy when we can connect that activity with some underlying biological motive. If it's going to give us food, sex, connection, status, right? If it's not going to give us one of those 4 rewards, then our nervous system says, no, that's a waste of energy, and that's when it invokes the emotion of laziness, or what we would call preemptive fatigue.
You feel tired before you do something.
Wow. Okay? And that's something I had to frame at the beginning of the book. It's like we think of laziness the completely wrong way. We think, are you lazy? It's like, no, laziness is an emotion. It's like, okay, I think about running and I feel like, I'm not going to go for a run because, I suddenly feel more tired before I even start running. That's because that person hasn't got a salient connection with the runner's high, with the social benefits of telling your friends or that you've run again, or and also they're not sure that they're going to be able to complete the run. So there's that uncertainty. So the nervous system, our nervous system protects us with the emotion of laziness or preemptive fatigue, and says, no, don't do that. That's a waste of energy. Don't expend that. There's no underlying biological motive to your run. Don't do it. Do something else. And so we go do something else.
So that's so interesting. It's sort of these underlying sort of primitive instinctual neurological reactions that are giving us emotion that we don't really understand why that's happening. Why do I feel like I'm tired before I want to go and do this run? Well, we don't understand why, but that is essentially the reason.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense when you start.
Yeah, it does make sense.
There's different ways to frame these conversations, but I like to frame it in terms of through the lens of evolutionary psychology, because I feel like it's given me a lot of answers. And it's like, well, and the key, I studied philosophy at university. I don't know,
yeah,
you know that. So for me, the question is always why. It's like, well, why do we experience the emotion of laziness? What's happening when I think about exercising and I don't exercise? Well, I feel lazy. Well, what is that? And what's going on? And why does that happen? Well, that's the answer. It's our nervous system saying, conserve energy. That's a waste of energy. And we can go from here in terms of thinking about laziness, and then we can start talking about effort, because the way I first framed the book was around this idea of effort, which I think is a hugely misunderstood concept. Because we often associate in a dictionary, you'll say effort is physical or mental force to achieve something, right? Okay. But I thought about this a lot, and I decided that effort is only ever mental. And the way I frame it at the beginning of the book is to think about 2 groups of school children. You can think about anybody, but 2 groups of school children, and they're taken outside by their teacher, and they're told by the teacher, okay, you guys just run laps of the playground. Just go and do that. Okay. And all the kids are going, oh, what happens? They get that emotion of preemptive fatigue and laziness.
Because there's no reason for it.
Their nervous system is saying, well, why am I going to run? Why am I going to expend energy? What's the point? Okay? Or better said, if you had one kid, even better, be one kid. Take one kid outside, the teacher says, go run laps at the playground.
There's no connectivity there.
There's just, there's no social reward because there's just one kid, so that's a big element. So just there's no, the kid's never run before. The kid's going, oh. But if you take that same kid, you put him with other kids, and the teacher just taps one on the shoulder and says, tag, you're it, and they start playing a game of tag, those kids will run double the distance and not think anything of it. And they probably won't have any much effort. They'll probably only have effort if they're feeling really tired already, but they'll probably already run a long way, right? So what happens? Where's the effort? So the effort is, tell the kid to go for a run. Oh, I don't want to go for a run. Okay, feeling that motion of fatigue. Right, so then the kid has to then apply effort. Effort is... Huberman has a great expression. He calls it limbic friction, right? And so he calls it limbic friction because our limbic system is our sort of our emotional center of our brain. So there's an emotion of laziness. Oh, I don't want to run, right? It's a reuptake of dopamine. That's what the emotion is, and we'll talk more about dopamine. And so it's basically saying, don't expend energy. Okay, but then the kid's going, okay, well, the teacher's told me to do it, and the teacher told me that if I don't start running, I'm going to have to do an hour of detention after class. So what's the kid doing? Then the kid suddenly goes, well, it activates its prefrontal cortex, starts manifesting the future scenario of being stuck in detention 3 hours in the future, and thinks, okay, well, I don't want that negative emotion either. So now it's got this limbic friction. It's got a prefrontal cortex that says, oh, I should run, and it's got a sort of more primitive limbic system that's saying, oh, don't run, conserve energy. And that's the limbic friction. It's the friction between these two parts of the brain. Okay? And so if that kid can then connect with enough salient future reward, if that can connect with, oh, I remember exactly what it was like in detention last time. I hated it. And, oh, there's that football match going on and I really want to see that and I'll really be upset. Suddenly the nervous system says, okay, well, actually, this is going to be a good use of energy. And the kid starts running. And that mental process, that activating the prefrontal cortex, manifesting that future scenario to tap into the reward circuitry for that future reward, that's effort. Okay? And the kids that ran instinctively, because there was immediate neurological reward, they've tapped into their fight or flight response. Tag is just a simulation, like all sports really, a simulation of some sort of life or death scenario. So it's a fight or flight scenario, running from a predator or chasing prey. So suddenly the nervous system starts goosing the cardiovascular system. It starts pumping catecholamines, which are like cortisol and adrenaline, into the system, saying, right, you're going to expend energy. It's really important for you to expend energy because we've evolved to train our bodies to be prepared for life and death scenarios of chasing prey or running from predators. And so the nervous system says, this is a good use of energy, run. It's instinctive. There's no effort involved. The effort would come as if the kid's suddenly exhausted and the nervous system saying, if you expend any more energy, you're going to damage your internal organs because you've expended so much energy. And the nervous system is saying, slow down. And the kid's going, no, but I really want to play. I really don't want to lose to that guy. And then that might take effort. But so, that expression, there's no courage without fear.
Yeah.
Well, I think of it in the context of exercise, there's no effort without laziness. You can't have effort without the emotion of laziness or fatigue or preemptive fatigue.
The effort is the pushing through the laziness.
It's getting your prefrontal cortex to push you through that moment where the nervous system is saying, don't expend any more energy. It's that limbic friction.
Get it, yeah. So how would you, in the scenario that you're talking about, that's really, really interesting. In the scenario that you're talking about where you want to go out for a run, and you get up, there's no guarantee of reward, so all of your nervous system is telling you, you shouldn't do this, you should be conserving energy, and you get that
preemptive
fatigue. How would you, without grabbing your mate and saying, chase me, or run away from me, how can you hack that system or can you even get past that using the same sort of idea of the neurobiology?
So the three principal things, and different people have put together different schematics, but this schematic I use is I say stimulate, guide, and facilitate, which sounds like a mouthful, but it's simple in my mind. And the long and short of it is, if there isn't sufficient expectation of neurological reward, you're not going to be running. And this is why I think the word discipline is the wrong narrative, because people are like, oh, I don't feel like training and I train. It's like, it's the wrong thing to say, because either way, either way, your nervous system had to expect enough neurological reward to expend that energy. Because our nervous system, I think of it as like a robot. It's not going to expend the energy if it doesn't expect the reward. And why? Because the expectation of reward is what allows our brain, our nervous system to produce dopamine, and it's dopamine that activates the energy pathways to allow us to expend energy. We're not going to expend any energy unless we produce the dopamine to expend the energy. And this has been, shown in rats. Rats get food from a lever and water from a lever. They'll keep doing that. But if you take away the dopamine, if you add a chemical into their system so that it binds with the dopamine, and so they have no dopamine, you take them a rat's length away, they're perfectly healthy rats, but they won't actually go and press the lever. They just won't move. They'll just die. And this happened with a bunch of students back
If you take away a rat's dopamine, it will just stay in one place and die.
Yeah, dopamine is the activation molecule. It's activation hormone. It's the movement hormone. It's not the reward.
Yeah. That's the misconception, right? Is that
Exactly.
it's the reward. It's the thing that makes you do the thing.
It's the thing you make you do the thing. So I'm not a neurobiologist. I've done some reading. It's a deep, deep rabbit hole. But my understanding is that the major neurochemicals like serotonin and oxytocin, we produce these in conjunction with dopamine. And it's the dopamine that then activates the energy pathways to allow us to move, right? If we don't have energy, if our nervous system isn't releasing energy, then we're not going to have any muscle contraction, we're not going to move. And this happened with I think it's a cool story. It happened with some students in like the 70s. They wanted to synthesize a new drug, and they accidentally synthesized a drug that binded with dopamine. And then they all died because they were perfectly healthy, but they just didn't move for anything.
So
it was irreversible. They all apparently passed away.
Just chilling in the living room.
I think something like that. Yeah.
And they couldn't. So when you say they couldn't move, because their body wouldn't give them any energy to do anything.
Yeah.
Because why would it?
Yeah, to do anything meaningful. I'd have to look more detailed study, but I heard it on a podcast recently.
That's mad.
Yeah. So the thing about I'm disciplined, it's like, well, either way, you might say you're disciplined. It's like, well, how did you get your nervous system to produce the dopamine to go and run anyway? Okay, some days you have the emotion of laziness. Cool. And that might be because you haven't slept as well. It might be because you've just eaten. It might be because you're considering a longer run and you've lost connection with the salient rewards because you haven't been socializing with your other mates who run, or because you haven't been logging your times, or it could be loads of reasons why anyone might experience the emotion of laziness, even though they're a regular runner. But if you did go and run, somehow your nervous system and your prefrontal cortex managed to tap into that enough reward to get up and go and expend the energy. And that's the picture. Now, the point is that if there isn't enough expectation of reward, then you're not going to be running. So how do you get to that point? Your question was, how do you get it so that you always go up and run? Well, the line that I use in the book is you got to make adjustments to your communities and environment that are going to continually stimulate, guide, and facilitate that activity. So in that case, what I would say to people is join a running community, log your times so that you have a salient connection with your, improvement and regression. That's going to be fun. And we can talk about the technical side of fun in a second. Have that social connection. We're a highly sophisticated social mammal. We've been successful as a species because we're a highly sophisticated social mammal. We will want to do things socially more than alone. Study from University of Toronto found that students who trained in groups did twice as much physical activity as people who train alone. So
I hate training alone.
You can be the exception, but that's because other things, like the guy who traveled a long way to the gym, you can be the exception, but that's because other things are working in your favor.
Yeah. And
we can talk about what it actually means to be training alone, because we're very rarely completely alone. And I think that's a long conversation.
Is that like social media or like your other communities around? You can go tell someone that you've done this, and that's
no man is an island.
Okay.
Like no man is an island, and you can go down a rabbit hole with that. It's like if you're watching TV, our nervous system doesn't really know that's most of our nervous system doesn't really know that's a projection, right?
Sure, yeah. Okay, maybe that's why TV's comforting for a lot of people.
Exactly.
But where's that other person? Like, I'm not going to be so lonely. I'm going to start thinking my kettlebells are a person, right?
No.
This isn't Castaway.
No, but you have a.
I mean, I've got that skull down there, so that could fool me.
But you've competed so many times that your nervous system has a direct association between training and the benefits of training to you, or when you're rolling, when you're coaching. So those are social interactions, and you've managed to create that connection of when I do this in here.
I mean, I hate training alone, so I'm fully on board with that. Like, it's one of my least favorite things to do in the whole world.
Okay.
Yeah. And I love training. Don't like training alone.
I mean, we can talk about, like, there are rewards other than oxytocin and, serotonin, which are sort of like social hormones. So we could talk about like runners and stuff and anandamide, because there's a lot of neurological reward, and that we can explain that from an evolutionary perspective as well.
The runner's high?
Yeah, runner's high. Yeah, anandamide, the bliss molecule.
That's like my understanding is that was evolved for hunting, for persistence hunting, and to give you like a high when you're. Is that it? Yeah?
But that's the thing. That's how I frame all of our behavior.
Yeah.
All of our behavior is we've evolved to pursue it because it had some sort of benefit to the propagation and replication of our DNA.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because then there's the obvious ones. I feel like running's the most obvious one in the world.
Yeah.
Because that was the earliest form of how we would hunt, is with persistence hunting. Before we had any tools, you just chase an animal until it kills over because it can't sweat. Fighting's another one, super obvious, right? Grappling, super obvious. Boxing, all of that stuff. Any fighting sports, super obvious. Maybe some other stuff that we do, like other sports, obviously eating, sex, all of that stuff. So what, in your opinion, just because it's the first thing I thought of, is the furthest remove, like the most points of connection away from something? I'm very much putting you on the spot there, but something that we do regularly where you're like, this is why we do it, but it's really a long route.
Well, it's hard for me to think like that because exercise is just so obvious.
Yeah.
It
doesn't have to be exercise.
Yeah. I've only really...
Okay, I got you.
One of the things I realized as I started writing the book, and why I was actually glad I picked that topic of exercise, because I might have written about something else, is that all activities, any behavior takes energy, right? Okay. If you just sit and thinking, doing a Sudoku puzzle, you're thinking using mental energy, right? Your brain is using up calories. But exercise is using up a lot of energy over a short period of time. And what that did is that highlighted these mechanisms. So it's like, well, why is the nervous system willing to expend such an amount of energy over a short period of time? And so it kind of highlighted and made everything really obvious.
Like, exercise is the most intriguing thing that we do because from a biological, evolutionary perspective, it doesn't make much sense. So you need to make it make sense in terms of our energy expenditure.
But if we're exercising, then it makes sense.
Exactly.
If our nervous system is expending energy, then we can.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah, there's always a reason. There's no magic.
Yeah,
that's kind of like a thing of mine. There's no magic. There's always an explanation. And self-discipline for me is like it's just magic. Anyway, I won't bang on about that. Well, examples that I give in the book. I mean, what's your favorite exercise?
Grappling with people.
Okay.
Rolling around on the floor.
What's your favorite exercise in here by yourself?
By myself?
Yeah.
Pull-ups.
I
can't do it at the moment.
Do you know that we, evolved from arboreal ancestors?
Of course, yeah.
Right? It's
My name's the raspberry ape.
Exactly, right? It's like, why do we put monkey bars in kids' playgrounds?
Yeah.
Because, why do I have hanging? It's a great exercise. It's super healthy. We talked about that already. And grip strength is huge correlate with decrease in all-cause mortality, whatever. But it's like, it's rewarding. Our brain releases dopamine, and rock climbing we know releases dopamine. They've done studies on that, and I don't know if that's because also the height and the fear. And we can talk about the fear element in a minute as well. But it's just our nervous system saying, yeah, this is beneficial for your survival. This has been beneficial to survival for millions of years, and your recent cousins. So yeah, hanging, swinging, suddenly there's dopamine. It's like, yeah, expend energy doing this. And I know my clients are happier when I incorporate pull-ups in a class or toaster bar or whatever, something where they're hanging. It's like, yeah, you enjoy it instinctively. You don't know why. You think it's just an exercise, but you enjoy it.
So now you've got me wanting to run through like every exercise. Why do I like this? Why do I like squats? I like sandbag squats.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean,
squats are a weird movement pattern, isn't it?
I don't know if I can right at this moment connect everything to an evolutionary activity, the evolutionary benefit activity. But one that I did pick up on, and I've never read it anywhere else.
Yeah.
But it's throwing.
Yeah.
Right, because obviously we've evolved to throw.
We have an incredible articulation in our shoulder that no other animal has.
Exactly.
Which is evolved from us hunting.
Exactly, because we used to hunt in packs and we used to do it at a safe distance, and spears and stones. And
like a apes, no other ape can throw like we do.
Okay, so why do we have so many sports that involve throwing?
Yeah.
You know, why is it that, and I'm sure you've done the same, I used to when I was younger, and I still do, if I'm with my cousin by a river or in a forest, we'll just pick up stones and throw them at a tree for ages. It is inherently rewarding. Why? Well, because it had an evolutionary benefit. And I'm pretty sure that we can start to map all exercises.
Yeah, one of my, going back to like grappling and stuff like that, that's another thing that sort of all kids love to roughhouse, right? They all like to grapple, they all like to fight. And I read or saw somewhere that it's why that's the reason why kids, not just humans, but like dogs and bears and, you know, all these different young, you know, lion cubs will wrestle and tussle with each other because they're basically training to kill. They're training to hunt and they're training to fight and they're training to survive.
Yeah, well, you know, Jordan Peterson's talked about this. He doesn't mention Jaak Pansep, but it's Jaak Pansep, I think, who did the studies with rats and found that if you tickle rats, they laugh. And it's like, well, why do we laugh when we get tickled? Well, where do we get tickled and laugh? Well, we get
vulnerable
tickled.
Areas.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
vulnerable areas.
Hunting, yeah.
You know, and so why do we find that inherently enjoyable? We don't find it enjoyable, and this is where fear comes in again. We don't find it enjoyable if it's somebody we don't know and it feels threatening. Suddenly we have a reuptake of dopamine and we're like, oh, scared, and we got suddenly fight or flight.
Yeah.
But if it's in a playful scenario with someone we're comfortable with, we laugh because, well, our nervous system's saying, yeah, do more of that. Train, get ready for your adult life.
Tickling. I was going to say that. Talk about tickling, like because it's, you know, it's training you for those vital areas for fighting and for killing and hunting and stuff. But like tickling's one of the weirdest things ever because you laugh but you don't like it, right? It's like it's like this combination that your body's found this one thing, I don't know anything else, that feels both pleasant and unpleasant at the same time, right? Like when you tickle someone, they want you to stop. They don't want you to carry on tickling them, but they're laughing.
And yet, I mean, I've got a 6-year-old, and she doesn't want it, but she'll happily come back for more of it.
Exactly.
You know, so I think that's maybe that's the lesson, isn't it, for the nervous system? It's like, well, you've got to
defend against it.
Train that you want to defend against it, but
you've got to keep
more
training
of it.
Exactly. It's that like the tickling thing is super fascinating.
Yeah, and just framing it from an evolutionary perspective, just everything kind of slots into place bit by bit. And what else? Yeah,
so I mean, it's really, really interesting. Like I'm super intrigued about sort of evolutionary anthropology and psychology and biology and stuff like that. So this is like ticking all of my boxes in terms of my interests. What I want to know is, you've come up with these ways of utilizing our evolved psychology to help you exercise. How has that affected? How have you been able to use that personally? Is that something? Have you always just been an active person, so you've never really had these hurdles, or have you been using? And what have your experience been using your own methods on yourself?
Well, I don't necessarily think about it in terms of evolutionary psychology, but I guess I can explain it from that perspective.
Sure.
But for me, it's things like, I don't mute my jiu-jitsu WhatsApp group, you know?
Yeah.
Simple as that, because that's just an external stimulus. That's what I mean by stimulation. It's just constant external stimuli. If you're getting constant external stimuli to remind you that, you know, the benefits, the enjoyment of it, and of course the guidance. So it's going to be like when the classes are, you know, it's all the people are involved, all the joy they're getting, all the photos of people having fun doing jiu-jitsu. It's on mute right now, and I'm not doing jiu-jitsu. But I know that if I do little things like that, that is going to constantly reinforce my nervous system. It's going to remind me of when the classes are. I'm going to know when to go, and you know, and invariably at some point, I will go again. And so I do that sort of stuff for myself all the time. And in terms of how I lay out my living room, you know, facilitating my pull-up bar, making sure I have space, and you know, making sure I have guidance. So I always have guidance. I talk about guidance quite a lot. It's really really fundamental. But I always make sure before I start a workout, I have a plan. I always set a timer.
So guidance doesn't need to be an external thing. It's just knowing what you need to do.
Guidance can be internal, can be external. Normally you've learnt it from somewhere else to start with. But it's basically making sure that your nervous system knows exactly what to do and how to do it at any given moment.
Yep.
Because if it doesn't, it's not going to do it. It's really, really simple. So if it's running, if I'm trying to get back into going for a run after a long time out of running, I'll not say to myself, I'm going to run to this point, I'm going to run back to here.
Yeah.
I'm not like, oh, I'm going to go for a run and don't know where I'm going to go, because again, like we talked about, my nervous system is saying, oh, well, this reward isn't guaranteed. You want to do this and this, but no. I'll say I'm going to run to this point, this street, and exactly the route, so that my nervous system says, okay, fine. Now that reward feels guaranteed. Let's go do that. And I'm more likely to do it if I have a fixed plan. It's Peter Gollwitzer who started saying this about you need a clear plan of action, and that's something I go on about to people when people say I don't have motivation. You probably just lack guidance. And that was there's a study from Rutgers University, which referenced in the book, where they tried to get people to have tetanus jabs, and they gave them like 1,000 of the students, whatever it was. They sort of told them how dangerous tetanus is, and they said 2 in 10 cases are fatal, and it's a debilitating disease, and it causes brain damage or whatever it is. And they saw how many people of those went and actually got tetanus jabs. And then another 1,000, they literally just gave them a timetable and a map. And guess what? The timetable and the map, there's way more went. Yeah, because, this is the thing. Nearly everyone I talk to wants to do exercise. And most of the time, it's that they're like...
They don't know what to do.
They don't know what to do and how to do it. They're not guaranteed if it's going to be safe. They don't know if it's going to be good for them.
Yeah.
And often it's just a case of guidance. It's just a case of literally getting taken by the hand and saying, you do this, you do that, you do this. My classes, they're not fun, but they're structured. And people come in and they say, okay, we're doing this. And they go, okay, we do this. And some elements of fun I throw in. And for me, with my classes, it's finding a balance between being functional and being fun. But yeah, guidance is massively overlooked in terms of getting people to exercise.
And one of the first things you mentioned there just made me think about something. So you're talking about the Jiu-Jitsu WhatsApp group. Is that one of the things, possibly one of the few positives of social media, of this, what was it? Was it socialize or the three things?
Stimulation.
Stimulation.
Yeah. I mean, social media does more than that. It also provides a lot of guidance. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of workouts on there that I see on my Instagram.
But then,
reels.
could there, at what point, or is there a point in which any of these positive attributes come oversaturated and can be too much? Because I think, for example, with guidance, if you put someone in a room, you tell them to exercise, and they go, I don't know what to do, they're not going to do it. So you give them a plan that says do 5 push-ups, 5 pull-ups, 5 squats, and they do it. Then you give them 10 workouts. Some tell them to do 5 push-ups, 5 squats, 5 this, and the other ones are telling them to do bear crawls, and the other ones are telling them to do handstands, and the other ones, that's going to be harder, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's amazing how well it works, because I work with an app as well for my sort of private clients, and I don't do like PT, but I do programming, and it's just an app. I write the programs, they check their phone, and it shows as a short video, not a 10-minute explanation, but just a literal 30-second video of the movement, and it tells them reps and sets. And the compliance is quite impressive. In terms of being overwhelmed and being spoiled for choice, yeah, there's definitely a danger of that. I feel like the net benefit of social media in terms of stimulating and guiding is going to outweigh the confusion element. I have a chapter in the book, or a section in the book, called One-Click Conditioning, and it's just all about that. It's just how, with a few clicks, I can, if I want to do more running, which I did, because now I've signed up with this High Rocks, so I was like, I want to do more running. So I just go, #running, okay, follow #running. And now I'm getting all these, these memes and quotes of like, didn't feel like running, went running. Want to go running, went running. And now my brain's going, my nervous system's going, oh yeah, I'm going to go running. And so I'm doing more running. It's it's just constant reinforcement. It's constantly, it's advertising.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things when people talk to me about self-discipline, and as I talked to you at the beginning about if you're a gym, you're not going to sit there if you're a gym manager thinking, oh, my clients aren't self-disciplined. No, you're going to market to them. And that's what marketing is. Marketing is tapping into our limbic system. It's tapping into our emotions. It's showing people looking happy, doing the thing that we're trying to be sold. And that's what we can do with social media. You can
market to yourself.
Exactly. You can, stop. I call it the willpower paradox because suddenly if you do too much, your locus of control, your autonomy shifts and you feel like you're completely controlled by external forces, and that's not good. We all need to feel like we're in control of our, decisions.
Are we?
If you listen to Sam Harris, he'll talk about how the self is an illusion, right? I like to think of it, well, why can't I know in my projections about the world and science and evolution, or it seems very likely that I am influenced by the world around me, that I'm not autonomous over my decision making. Yet my experience and my pragmatic experience is that I am autonomous. So I don't understand why I can't just have the wherewithal, which I do for myself. I have the wherewithal that, okay, it feels like I'm autonomous. It's good that I feel like I'm autonomous because that gives me a lift of serotonin and dopamine, which allows me to expend the energy to do this stuff. But at the same time, I'm not going to be so naive to think that I can be completely dependent on that. And I'm going to make the adjustments to my community's environment to continually stimulate, guide, and facilitate the activities. And then I'm going to, have the double benefit. Why can't we have the wherewithal that, okay, it's probably an illusion, my decision to go and exercise. But it didn't feel like one.
Yeah.
And that's what matters. I felt like I was in control. And I hold on to that. It's a paradox.
So, there's loads of stuff that we can talk that you mentioned already that we want to go back to. But we'll start with the first one, which is about your background in philosophy and how much that has played into your philosophy on exercising and sport. Or is that kind of... Because obviously it seems to be very much based on science and neuroscience specifically. How much does that philosophical background play in?
Hugely, because I think philosophy lies at the margins between curiosity and science. And it always has. And I could go into, a short version is, 300 years ago, the word science didn't exist. And Newton was a natural philosopher and Darwin was a natural philosopher. And all of the ancient Greeks were philosophers, but they were trying to understand the nature of matter. All the four elements, all matter is made of the four elements, air, earth, water, and fire.
Or maths, or...
Yeah, so so philosophy is trying to understand how the world works, and science is just the things that have been tested empirically that we all have a consensus on. That's what has become science. Okay, so... And that's how I see philosophy.
So does that mean all science is philosophy, but not all philosophy is science?
Absolutely. Yeah. Or all science was philosophy. And slowly...
It evolves into...
Well, it's slowly
when it's tested,
taken out of the ether and grounded in hard evidence.
Yeah.
But the philosophers are still left with plenty of work and plenty of questions. And I just simply found myself with the question of how can people do more exercise? And I didn't want the book to be a preachy, this is what you do this and do this. I just wanted, so it's the subtitle is what actually makes us exercise. And I just kept on looking at all the mechanisms around. And the more I wanted it to be more of a philosophy book when I started, but I also wanted it to be right. So I just kept on digging deeper. And in the first sort of word vomit that came out of me, I wrote something like, that's about habits and I won't write about that. And now the whole book is about habits because the book kept on evolving and it had to be rewritten until it was right. And I had to keep reading and learning about neuroscience and, economics and all these things to get the right answer. So it's philosophy in the sense that, well, not everyone will agree with me. It's philosophy in the sense that it's not agreed upon. Like, for example, something that bugs me and I ruminate on a lot at the moment is this idea of the fact that you can make effort rewarding in itself. So I've heard Huberman talk about this, and he's a Stanford neurobiologist, so, who am I to question that thinking, but the schematic that I've laid out, it just doesn't make any sense to me that you could have effort as a reward in itself. Because if it's the limbic friction, I'm just waffling here, but if it's the limbic friction, if it's that this part of my brain wants one thing that's beneficial in the future, this part of my brain wants to be, look better, feel stronger, be prepared for that jiu-jitsu competition in 6 months' time. This part of me just wants to stay in bed and sleep. Okay? The idea is that moment, or just that feeling of effort, could be motivating itself. But it's like, well, hold on. This is tapping into a reward in the future. This is tapping into a reward now. The friction is two opposing sides trying to appeal to two different amounts of dopamine, dealing with two different energy expenditures. Well, how is that going to connect with that feeling going to suddenly produce dopamine in itself? And if that was the case, and if someone could do it, then they'd be Superman, because every time they thought about doing anything, they'd never have, they're just the thing of, oh, well, I don't really feel like doing it. They'd do it. Well, gosh, they'd be like, David Goggins would have read like every single, like an encyclopedia of books, but he hasn't, because our ability to overcome effort, or the feeling of preemptive fatigue or lethargy, or whatever you want to call it, is going to be contextual. It's going to apply to some sort of context where we have the expected neurological reward based on the communities that we're affiliated with, based on our experience, and it's going to be context dependent. And we see that. It's not like, I just see it a lot, and it just doesn't make sense to me that effort could be rewarding in itself.
So you mentioned it, and so I'll ask you, or him I should say, what's wrong with David Goggins? What why is it being crossed neurologically that he does what he does?
I'm just scared to say anything bad about David Goggins, because the guy's intimidating as fuck.
He'll come for you.
The thing is,
he'll ask you who's going to carry the logs.
The thing is,
and the boats.
And I said this at the beginning already. The thing is, if I want to do a workout, I'll play some track that has some speech from David Goggins talking.
Okay.
Right, and because that motivates
it gets you going.
It gets me going. It gets me going, and it gets millions of people going.
Yeah.
But it gets millions of people going.
I love him. I think he's great.
Yeah.
He's fucking nuts.
It's super inspirational, and it gets millions of people going. But they already have certain things going for them. And maybe if you only listened to David Goggins and you'd never exercised, but you kept on listening to him, that would make your nervous system suddenly think that running was important. So then your brain is going to be basically primed to think, okay, well, hold on. Oh, that friend of mine said they're going running next week. Oh, maybe that's important, because you've constantly got this echo of this dominant male saying, go for a run. Who's going to carry the logs? Whatever it is.
Yeah.
So maybe just that works, but I want to make sure that we understand why that works in context. Okay. Yeah. But it's like he's published 2 books, but if and I get stick for this a lot, but I feel like, and the reason I talk about someone like David Goggins is because I feel like they're champions of this idea of discipline, or the calloused mind and stuff. And I feel like if I was going to put myself on the spotlight for an idea, then I would welcome challenges to that idea, as I welcome challenges to my thinking for this. And it's like, if it applies to everyone, if the mind was so callous, then again, there'd be. I mean, he admits he doesn't necessarily read much, but he's published 2 books because he had a ghostwriter write them for him, and I assume that he would have known that reading would have been important for making a better book, and so on. And there's other examples of this in the fitness crazed world. It just seems to me that it's definitely contextual, and it makes sense for the neural mechanism that it's contextual, because it's the friction between 2 expectations of dopamine. How is that going to produce dopamine in itself? Because this activity gives me this reward. The reason I'm expecting reward is because of my experience. It's not the friction in itself. Anyway.
And you mentioned there that you accept sort of challenges to the ideas that you presented in this book. Have you had many challenges?
No, but that's probably because no one who's, you got to wrap your head around it first. And I had a bunch of friends read the book, and I've had lots of people read the book, but no one no one challenges it because you've really got to wrap your head around it, and you've got to wrap your head around the neurobiology, and then we can have a deeper conversation. And got to think the conversation is important as well. I think the conversation is important because, like I said, I want there to be a more honest narrative around exercise psychology. And I don't think we have that.
Yeah, I think it is. I think everyone in the fitness space is after the same thing. Well, hopefully, right, is to have more people exercise. Like, I don't think you'll find anyone who thinks the world wouldn't be a better place if everyone did some form of exercise, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, I was listening to the 6-episode podcast series between Dr. Andy Galpin and Andrew Huberman. And I think it was on purpose, but I noticed that Galpin, I think the words effort or self-discipline were used, but then he didn't use them himself. So he wasn't drawn on it. So I feel like there's plenty of people who understand that, you know, it's not a good way to frame the narrative. There's much more rational, complete ways to frame the narrative. I don't think I'm completely new in this. When I started writing the book, I didn't see anyone who presented an honest narrative around exercise psychology. And I'm sure some neurobiologists could create a more detailed and precise explanation from the neurobiological side. But yeah, I like to think that I've presented a complete picture in terms of, you know, the economics and the social elements and how we can do that and how we can tap into that, and yeah, done it through a fictional story with some characters.
Yeah.
But that's might have been a good idea, might not have been, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I think like they're all, everything makes sense that you're saying here. I think it's a really interesting way of framing it, and I'm all for it. Another one that you mentioned earlier that we were going to talk about, and one that, because I haven't read the whole book, but I have flicked through it, and I mean, it's a really nice book. It's a nice, from what I have read, nice, easy to read, and I am going to go through the entire thing at some point. But fun in the context of exercise, the importance. I think, for me personally, fun and play has always been something that has been important in my own idea of training. I know, like, a lot of people, if they watch me and follow me on Instagram, they think that maybe I just do crazy stuff, which isn't true. I do a lot of basic training stuff as well. Or, I mean, maybe my basic is different to what other people's basic would be. I was training yesterday, and there's a group of 4 of us that were lifting, and we did something, and one of the guys said, you know, Dan, like, even the basic stuff he's got to do in a different way, like nothing can be normal. And it was like I was switching a sandbag for something that would be a barbell or something like that. But I think I see so many people, some of the criticism I get, very common, which is, just do deadlift, back squat, bench press, overhead press, bent over row. I'm like, for 50 years? That's all you want me to do? Every single 3-4 times a week for 50 years, you just want me to do 5 exercises?
Probably a lot of people do that.
Boring as fuck. Some people do. I had an argument with a guy about, I just do this, and this. I'm like, well, one, you're going to get diminishing returns at some point. Come on, you're going to get diminishing returns. But I think people can get so tied in. Anyway, I'm not going to go on a rant about people getting too bogged down in the big 3 and SBD as metrics of strength. But I always leave a little bit of room in my workouts for a bit of fucking about. Not that I think that the fucking about is necessarily going to have any benefit, but some people are like, you're in the gym for an hour, make every second count. I'm like, geez, if you don't have 10 minutes to juggle steel balls or to fuck around on a balance board or to try and swing a big sword, then you need to sort your life out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, novelty is something that I grappled with, which I don't think I tackled in the book. Because fun, the simple way of talking about fun, and the way I talk about the book, is that fun comes in doses. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphin, and I add on endocannabinoids on there to include anandamide. Basically, anything that has neurological reward could be classified as fun. Right? Now, there's different ways we think about fun, but essentially, neurologically, that's what's going on. which is why someone can go and run an ultramarathon by themselves and come back, and people are like, why the hell did you do that? And they say, well, it's fun. Well, they're connected with the neurological reward.
Yeah.
And because they're producing the dopamine, they're getting the energy activation, and they're doing the run. Right, so it's fun for them because it's got the right neurological mechanism. And then that applies to the things we've already talked about. You know, throwing is fun because it has that evolutionary benefit. Novelty makes sense that it activates dopamine pathways because it could be something beneficial to enable us to get more reward, and it could be something that is hazardous, dangerous. So suddenly it might activate our nervous system to say, I'm going to expend energy on this task because it could be beneficial, it could be dangerous. So I think that's the best mechanism I could explain novelty out of. And then I would say that within that, then there's contextual situations where I was known at boarding school for being the guy with the most useless talents.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So if it was balancing coins on my elbow and then snatching them out of hand, I could do the most. Right. Useless talents. Why? Well, because I got some sort of social benefit probably from being good at that. I could do it, and I knew that if I could do it, I got some sort of, hierarchical, exactly, some sort of hierarchical status. And I would suggest that that's probably a similar case for other people, you included.
Okay.
For enjoying those sort of novel, weird tasks. We can do them, and we know that other people can't. It's probably a big factor.
Interesting.
And yeah, that's probably a big factor. Yeah, there's a lot in the book on social structures and status and hierarchy and stuff. And I think that's why we do a lot of what we do.
So, yeah, everything that is fun for a reason, that reason being connected to neurochemicals. You just got to find... That's... Theorizing that seems to suck the fun out of it.
But this is the thing, because like I said, you can frame the conversation in different ways. I can say you need to expect sufficient neurological reward to have sufficient dopamine for activation of energy. Or you can say, well, if exercise isn't fun, you're not going to be doing it.
Yeah.
Which is exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And the second one makes sense to everybody, but you don't quite understand the whole narrative because you're thinking... Because you don't quite know what makes something fun. It's kind of this elusive, ethereal thing where you're like, oh yeah, this is fun. Oh, that's not fun, but he says it's fun. It's like, okay, well, when we start to frame it, frame it in terms of serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, and anandamide, we go, okay, well, am I going to get any social bonding from this? Am I going to get any oxytocin? Am I doing it together as a group? Right? The reason my classes are structured where everyone, pretty much, unless I have too many and I've got to separate, the sort of the supersets, they're doing the same thing all the time. They're doing the same thing together. And the last bit of the workout, they're doing it together. And it's like, that's by design, because they're going to enjoy it more. They're going to want to expend more energy because the nervous system is saying, other mammals around me are doing this, other mammals of the same species are doing it, I should be doing it. Right? There's a lot in the book on social conformity. Right. So, and for some reason, they're doing it. It must be sufficiently fun because they're willing to expend the energy. Okay? And, is there a competitive element? Are they going to and this is hugely important with silent exercise in any discipline, there has to be expectations of competence. Serotonin, coupled with dopamine, super important. And that's why anyone who goes to a jiu-jitsu class and loses and loses and loses and loses often will then leave if they only lose. Okay? And we can talk again about rats in that context. A cool study about rats.
Rats lose in jiu-jitsu fights.
The larger rat will lose 30% of the time when fighting with subordinate males. It will on purpose lose 30% of the time.
Otherwise they'll fuck off.
And won't let the dominant rat train.
They won't wrestle with them.
They won't wrestle. They'll leave, and then the dominant rat doesn't get to train and get better. And doesn't improve his chances of survival. And Jaak Pansep found that even if you remove their prefrontal cortex, they still do the same. And what I said to my father, who beat me...
The rats will... go on,
sorry. Well, I said this after... I told you my dad beat me 6-love at tennis the other day.
I don't want to play with you again.
I said even a fucking male rat without a prefrontal cortex... has more social awareness than you do.
That's really interesting, because my instinct with a lot of this stuff, obviously, which I'm sure is everyone who would be listening or would reading or anyone who gets this information, because it really does, you're sort of pulling back the superficial wall of what we're doing as humans and looking at it from a more analytical perspective and the why behind all of it. I guess that's the philosophy of it. So I apply it to my lifting, and then we apply it to the jiu-jitsu as well. That's kind of why I'm like, well, where are these interactions? Where are these neurochemicals? Where are these rewards coming within that jiu-jitsu space? And yeah, one of them is, you're right. If someone loses all the time, they're not gonna want to come back.
Hugely important. As a coach, it's one of my biggest jobs, is ensuring that someone who comes in and starts has an expectation of competence. It's why you give people the shit sandwich whenever you critique something. You give them positive reinforcement for something they're doing well. Anything, then correct whatever they're doing wrong, and then finish it off. And I don't always get that right, but you finish it off with some other form of positive reinforcement. Doesn't matter. It's like, if I tell someone who's like, oh, I don't feel like doing it. If I've got a PT client, so there's no social element going on, they're just by themselves, and that's why I don't like doing it. And they're in their 60s, they're overweight, they don't exercise. It's like, do 10 squats, just 10 squats. It's like, I don't want to do it. Oh, but you've got such good hip mobility. You get into such a good deep position. Bang, 10 squats. Why? Because suddenly they got an expectation of competence. Oh, I'm good at this. Oh, my nervous system's saying is I'm going to be good at it. Expectation of reward, dopamine, energy, get it done.
And it's all psychological.
It's all psychological. And, it does. It kills the romance, and it kills the idea of, and this is another thing, and this is my little pet peeve with sports psychology, because I read a book on sports psychology right in the book. And there's things like words like grit and determination. And maybe they've started to ground them in like a hard definition. But really, I find these are just romantic words that we have a romantic connection with. And I get that it kills the romance to look at it so analytically and so deterministically, and it kills the magic, And
isn't there some positives to romanticizing things and sort of finding that balance between analyzing and science and romanticism and poetry?
Well, there's huge benefit in that is what most people are familiar with, and that's what taps into the limbic system, the emotional limbic system of most people. Those words, they connect with me, even though I think that they don't not ground in hard science. If you say to me, Simon, you showed real grit in that workout, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, this jiu-jitsu legend has said this, I've got grit. I have a connection with that. I'm going to have an emotional response to that, which is fantastic. And I've got to have that wherewithal when I work with my clients. I don't use the deep lingo with my clients when I'm working coaching with them. I'll use those same words. But if I'm going to have an honest conversation,
you use words like grit.
I might not use grit, but I like how determined you were. I like how brave you were.
Instead of saying, I liked how much your prefrontal cortex was, etc., etc.
Someone might like that. Yeah, I'm such a romantic guy. No, but it's like, it's one of the reasons. Like, there's the same from Einstein. He's like, you've either got to say that there are no miracles or that everything is a miracle. And he's also talking about he was a determinist, and the book is very much written with the determinist perspective, that we can explain every single emotion and thought and decision. And he was talking about quantum theory probably, but there's still a lot of wonder in the complexity, because I'm never going to understand all of the lifetime of conditioning and stimuli that one person has had, that they suddenly manifest a given moment based on the fact that they, saw a car drive by, which is similar to the car they drove as a kid, which was when they drove to karate class. And the complexities are endless for how the mechanism comes about. But what we can start to do is, if we want to get people to exercise more, is we can start to at least use that understanding to get people on from all fronts, to encourage them to want to go and exercise.
And the interesting thing about it is, I'm guessing it's sort of even if you know why you're tricking yourself into wanting to exercise, for example, using some of your strategies, it doesn't really matter. It's sort of like an honest placebo thing, where you take the sugar pills knowing they're sugar pills, but they said that they're going to make you thinner, so you get thinner, which is a real thing. It's just like the power of that nervous system doesn't really care whether you know why it's working or not.
You said you like philosophy, right? A little bit?
Yeah, probably not as much as you, but yeah, I'm very much interested in it, yeah.
I've written the book within a scientific paradigm.
Yeah.
But I'm a pragmatist, right? And that means that I know that I'm completely limited by my experience. And actually, my experience is first and foremost the first thing I have. It's not something that is created out of a projection of a scientific realist world. The first thing I know that I actually have is my experience. So my experience is that I'm self-disciplined. From a pragmatist perspective, I'm self-disciplined. Like I said, it's a paradox, but let's have the wherewithal that, like, you're more likely to have that experience if you make sure that you stimulate your nervous system to expect neurological reward, if you make sure your nervous system knows what to do and how to do it at every given moment, and you make it as convenient as possible, then you're more likely to have more of those feelings of self-discipline. So...
And are there other people out here talking about doing the same stuff that you're doing? Like these strategies that you've spoken about are so simple and are so actionable. I think a lot of the time with this sort of advice, maybe like super scientific stuff or neurobiology stuff, they're maybe not super actionable, but the way that you're presenting this stuff is very easily actionable to do all of it. Are there many other people out there who are giving these sort of bits of information with the same idea behind them?
I'm gonna say, I mean, I'm sure there are, but I'm
not that you're aware of.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, listen, there's a lot of overlap between like my book and Atomic Habits. It's a different schematic because I'd already written my book for 5 years when he published his book, James Clear.
Yeah,
and it's a great book, and it's been edited by a really good editor, and it's a great book to read. And there's a lot of actionable takeaways in that. So there are people who are talking about it in terms of habit psychology, definitely talking about it, and he talks about exercise, but really honing in on exercise, and then framing it in terms of energy. And understanding the emotions of fatigue, what effort is, what laziness is. No, I haven't come across that. And I did hear in a podcast once, I heard Jordan Peterson, I think it was with Andrew Huberman, say, because your nervous system has to justify that energy cost. And it's like, yeah, it's always got to do that. So it's just energy, just gonna expend it, do some exercise. Let's make sure it can justify it, and you'll do it. It's like, it's just scales. Reward, energy. Can you tip them in favor of action? Just
simple as that.
And everyone, and the biggest takeaway is that no one's special. This works with everybody, and it doesn't just apply to exercise. It works on any discipline, any activity. I had one guy who I was kind of like coaching. It was just happen chance. It's not something I generally do, but he was really struggling with his studies at university. He was 20 years old, had no motivation. Okay, so what did I do? Well, I stimulated, guided, and facilitated. But to give that some more concrete example, one of the things I did with him is I positioned him in a competence hierarchy. He wasn't going to class that often. He wasn't really seeing his friends. I asked him, what were your friends' results in his last exams? I said, I don't know. I said, what are the names of other people doing your course? I don't know. I said, okay, well, this week you're going to give me 7 names of people who are doing your class. Okay, 7 names, great. Okay, right, this week you're going to give me what all of those people got in your last exam. Okay, so, all right, okay, so where do you rank? And we saw him and we put it in front of his desk, where he ranked. And our nervous system isn't so connected to our prefrontal cortex that it knows that it's an unimportant university degree that he might not need in the future, some abstract study like accounting. It has no clue. Our nervous system has spent millions of years saying, all right, this is your rank in a competence hierarchy. Every time you've fallen down your position in any competence hierarchy, you have died or lost out on resources. You've lost out on mates, sexual partners, food, space, water, whatever it is. And that's bad. That is bad for the propagation and replication of our DNA, because that's how evolution has filtered out these mechanisms. So guess what? He started sitting down and studying, because he had a salient connection to, if I don't want to fall further down this competence hierarchy, my nervous system needs to expend energy sitting down at this desk and reading these books. And you can do that with anything. It just we're all hardwired the same way.
And sticking on the competency one, because going back to sort of the jiu-jitsu, the guy's getting tapped by everyone, he's not going to stay around very long. How do you fix that paradox of the worst guy in the room?
As in, if you're the worst guy in the room.
If you're the worst guy in the room, or if you're trying to get the worst guy in the room not to
leave.
Not
to leave.
Yeah.
Expectation of competence. It doesn't have to be competence initially. It has to be expectation of competence. You'll get there eventually. You'll get there. You see Jim over here, he was 10 times worse than you when he started, and he's kicking ass now. Expectation of competence is, and you're way ahead of him. I'm way ahead of him. Okay. Expectation of competence. It doesn't have to be competence now. It's got to be expectation of competence. Otherwise, the nervous system is saying, same thing. It's an evolutionary mechanism. I'm going to be at the bottom of this competence hierarchy. That's not good for my survival. That's not good for the propagation and replication of my DNA.
If I quit, I'm going to stay at the bottom, right? If you're at the bottom of the competency hierarchy,
you're going to find a new competence hierarchy.
Okay.
You're going to find a new space with new mammals, or new animals to compete with. You're going to, and I'm not competitive. Yes, you are. Everyone is. And women have way more lots of testosterone, like men have testosterone, and testosterone couples with serotonin for competence battles and imposing the activity that is going to help us maintain position or increase position in the competence hierarchy. So my point with that is that everyone is competitive. You're just not competitive in this because you don't expect competence. But I guarantee, if I find the thing that you think you're good at, and I position you in a competence hierarchy of people around you that you're familiar with, you're going to try and make sure that you don't fall down in rank, because everyone is wired the same way. Everyone is competitive. You just got to find which competence hierarchy they're familiar with. And maybe it's sport. Maybe it's, how many books did you read last week? Maybe it's what did you get in your studies? Maybe it's what did you make last quarter? Whatever. Maybe it's how did you do in the last week's crossword puzzle? Who knows?
Yeah.
But everyone is doing something with their time, and everyone has some sort of wherewithal of where they rank within a social construct. And
you brought it up there, and it just made me think, is there, because of the sort of physiological differences between men and women, does that affect the sort of base guideline of all of the information that you know, that neurochemistry stuff that we've spoken about? Is that difference between the sexes, or is it for the most part pretty similar? Because obviously when you talk from an evolutionary perspective, there's a big difference between how males and females are going to be reacting to certain things.
Yeah, I think I have to put my hands up there and say I don't know. Obviously, a lot of the mechanisms are the same. There is the testosterone levels are high in women as well. They have more testosterone. They have estrogen. It's just that there's different.
They have a lot more estrogen than we do.
So the mechanism is the same. Do they produce as much testosterone? Are they going to willing to expend as much energy in worrying about status? I don't know. I haven't looked at it, and I could say, no, I won't say that. Okay.
Don't say anything, because you start to think that if ultimately the big takeaway from this podcast is that sort of neurochemistry rules everything that humans do, which of course it does, and therefore can differences in our neurochemistry between sexes be the cause for the general social differences between us? And you've got to expect, for whatever reason, even if we don't know what it is, it's got to be a reason.
Evolutionary speaking, across most sexual species, there's gender roles, which leads me to believe there's probably gender roles in humans, which is why, that's why my daughter plays with dolls. Why is she playing with a doll? Well, because it produces oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine, because that's her preparing for adult life. It's preparing for raising her young. So there's going to be some sort of different sort of dynamics in how the neurobiology encourages us to behave, but for the different roles, for sure. How that applies to exercise and amount of exercise, I don't know. There's probably stuff on it, but I will say this point that I mentioned in the book. A lot more women do sport now than they used to, right? 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And I'd show the table that shows women's participation in the Olympics over the last 100 years. That's in the book. And it's not that women have taken up sport. It's that women that were encouraged to play sport when they were young have just grown up. And so, and I also talk about the fact that, one of the biggest FA Cup finals in terms of crowd capacity was the women's FA Cup final during the Second World War. And after the war finished, the men came back and said, "Oh, well, we don't want women taking over our sport." And they had a massive crowd. They had like, I don't know, maybe it was 60,000 crowd or something, a massive capacity crowd. And men came back saying, "We don't want women playing our sports." And they banned them from every ground. So women weren't allowed to play until, I don't know, not that long ago. The FA overruled this not that long ago. And it meant that women were kept out of sports. So there's definitely a social element. There's also things like contraception as well, which has affected women's ability to participate and stay participating in sport to later ages and so on, or throughout their lives. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of women in sport now, way more than we have done before. And their neurobiology hasn't changed. They haven't evolved to be different. The social construct and the conditioning around that has changed. So, it suggests that the neurobiology is very similar in women, and we keep seeing more women in sport, which suggests that the same influences affect them the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, super, super fascinating stuff. And this is your first book that you've written?
It's my first book.
How long did it take you?
6.5 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Of constant work on it, or?
No.
I don't mean like 24 hours a day.
I thought about it all the time.
Yeah.
And then I a few years ago, I started writing for a local newspaper in Mallorca, and I wrote a health and fitness column for 2 years, pro bono, just to like improve my writing.
Yeah. Did you have any experience in writing or anything?
No. No, I wasn't good at writing.
I mean, you must have had some like degree in philosophy. You must have.
I had a degree in philosophy.
Yeah.
My essays were rubbish. My writing was rubbish. My philosophy was, I like to think it was good, but my writing wasn't good. No, I had to learn a lot of stuff, and writing was one of them. I did a creative writing course, an online creative writing course, and I wrote for a newspaper for 2 years, which definitely improved my writing considerably, making it more concise. And then I had to re-edit the book to try and bring in that conciseness. So there's definitely better writers out there. I hope that the narrative around exercise psychology is the best part of it. I like to think the writing is decent. But my metaphor for writing the book was, I saw that documentary of those 4 girls who rowed across the Pacific. It's quite a cool trip. And she says, at the end, everyone's got their Pacific to cross in their life. And so the metaphor came to my head that writing my book was like rowing across the Pacific in a bathtub without paddles and no compass. And I just kept on meandering around aimlessly for a very long time, wondering which direction to go in. And then the best feeling in the world was spotting land, seeing that I was actually coming to the end of the book.
Yeah.
It was quite an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
So,
are you thinking about writing any more, or?
Absolutely, yeah.
What would it be about? It's still same idea, or?
Honestly?
Yeah.
Honestly, the one that ruminates through my mind mostly is to write one on the nature of God. Wow. Yeah, I've had this idea about the nature of God for a while. I wrote an article about it. You can read it on my Medium account, The Fitness Author. But have you ever heard of integral theory? Ken Wilber? No. It's this idea, essentially, that these opposing camps for different beliefs can be reconciled. Mm. And one of the ideas there is that religion and science can be reconciled. And I like to think that my idea for the nature of God, that the article I've written is titled "The Nature of God," is a way to reconcile those ideas. And we have to talk about pragmatism. We have to talk about evolution. We have to talk about lots of different things. But yeah, that would be the next book that's on my mind right now.
That's a pretty different topic.
It is, but you still have to frame it, or I would frame it from an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, by the rationale of you can look at anything in life through an evolutionary perspective, right? Irrespective of whether it's exercise or religion or anything.
I think that's definitely true.
Have you read Exercised by Daniel Lieberman?
I haven't.
It's good.
I actively avoided it because I thought I'm just going to steal everything and it's going to be too obvious.
It's good.
You know what I did do though?
Yeah, go on.
To kind of help my, search engine optimization on my Amazon, you can buy it on Amazon, on my Amazon description, I went to his description of his book and sort of like, was like, oh, okay, just took that. So that might have been copy and pasted.
Have you read the Story of the Human Body?
No, I haven't.
I like Daniel Lieberman. He's good.
Yeah.
Runner. Yeah.
Runner.
My favorite part of that book was, I mean, anyone listening, I definitely recommend. I'm sure anyone listening to this would be intrigued enough with what you said. I am going to read that book as my next book, your book, for sure, because I'm really intrigued now. I probably should have read it before I podcast with you. But then I get a lot of books from people that I podcast with, and I always feel like if I read the book, I'm coming with a perspective that's going to be different from the listener. And if I don't read the book, then I'm coming from the same perspective of the reader. That's my excuse. But I'm going to read your book.
So good. I wrote a book and stopped reading altogether, so don't worry about it.
But I'm going to read your book. But if anyone else, obviously get Simon's book, and also the Daniel Lieberman books, Exercised and Story of the Human Body, are very good.
Definitely on my to-do list is to read his book.
Do you not read it at all?
I know, I do, but I read a lot when I was writing that.
Really?
And then I published that. And
what sort of stuff?
At the moment, I'm reading Tony Nadal, so Rafa Nadal's uncle's book, called Todo se puede entrenar. I'm reading it in Spanish. Everything can be trained. And I'm also reading. I'm always reading a bunch of books at the same time. I'm rereading Behave from Robert Sapolsky, which I listened to as an audiobook when I was writing this. And
it's a very long book.
It's a very long book, but I'm back on that one. What else am I reading right now? And those two are the two that I'm working on at the moment. Oh, I'm also reading some more Ken Wilber as well. Do
you find that reading whilst writing helps to inspire ideas? Is that the idea?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like if you don't know what to write, just read.
Yeah,
absolutely. The reason I'm reading Tony Nadal's book, there's a couple of reasons, but one of the things that fascinates me, if we're allowed to digress,
yeah, of course, I
don't know what time it is. So, this book is about how to get your Joe Average off the sofa to go and exercise. Enough regular exercise to offset diseases of sedentarianism.
Yeah,
great. But then there are some people who just are able to just be the top performers, like David Goggins, who can overcome, they have that grit, that catchword. And so someone like Rafa Nadal would fall into that category. And I read David Goggins' first book, and I'm reading this book, and I'm trying to think, what is it that creates these outstanding performers within sort of the same framework, the same neurobiological framework. And expectation of competence is obviously what we've talked about. You can sort of translate that to belief. And how do these guys have belief to get their nervous system to push as hard as possible? It's in those crunch moments, because I think that's a huge element. It's like there's that slight element of disbelief. And it was interesting to read about how Tony Nadal made Rafa Nadal kind of feel invincible, because he made himself some sort of oracle when he was a young boy. So what he would do is he convinced him that he was this ex-professional footballer from Italy, because his brother Juan Miguel Nadal played for Barcelona and played for Spain, and then he had all these friends from Italian football. And so he told little Rafa that, oh yeah, I was this big superstar in Italian football. They used to call me the Gran Tonino or something. And then when these top level footballers came, and Rafa, I don't know, was like 7 or 8, they're like, "Hey, Tonino, how's it going? Oh, we wish you had you back in the, playing with us."
They were in on it.
They were in on it. Yeah, they would be in on it. And he also did these things where he would have games pre-recorded on cassette, on VHS, and then he'd play them and he'd tell Rafa, like, "I think that they're going to score in the next 10 minutes and stuff." And little Rafa, thinking this was live streamed,
wow.
suddenly it would happen. And so when his uncle told him stuff, he believed it. He said, "You're not going to," and he did lots of things which are fascinating in terms of never let him get carried away, always thinking he had to work harder.
And this was, was this stuff that was genuinely to try and put himself in the best position to coach, or was it just him getting an ego trip? Was he thinking, if I make myself an oracle, he's going to listen to me, he's going to have great belief in himself? Or is it...
It sounds, from reading the book, I'm not quite finished, but it sounds that he's perfectly comfortable to say that it's partly his ego.
Yeah.
And just likes doing that. And maybe he had some inclination that it would have a benefit as well, psychological benefit. But it seems like it definitely had. I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm always fascinated with what is it that gives those people that belief in those moments. Talk a lot about belief, and I talk a lot about Alcoholics Anonymous in the book as well, because that belief that you're going to get better is crucial to getting better. But yeah, it's interesting. Where does it come from? What was the conditioning early in life that gave people that, what happened to David Goggins early in life that allows him to, push on with broken shins and keep running? How does that enable that dopamine and that activation for more energy and expenditure, despite pain, despite, all those problems? So it's something I'm still ruminating on.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing that I was thinking about when during this discussion was, even though you can use the same lens to view athletes of all levels, from elite down to, couch potatoes trying to get off of it. But this book is designed primarily to try and assist those in making the first steps into a fitness journey, essentially. But then how would the same ideas work for the elite performers, which you kind of mentioned there, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that would be a future book.
Maybe.
If
someone pays me to do it, commissions me to do
it. Simon, we got to get you to the airport shortly.
Cool. I'm glad someone's monitoring the time.
That's an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Likewise.
Really fascinating stuff. Has made me already... I'm not sure I've done many podcasts that have made me quite think as much in terms of changing my perceptions of something, but very, very interesting, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, buddy. That is it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you want to follow Simon, then you can catch him on Instagram. His handle is @thefitnessauthor. And if you are interested by the subject matter, then definitely check out and consider buying his book. You can buy it from Amazon. It is called Working It Out. And if you just search on Amazon for Working It Out and Simon Shears, then it will take you right to it on Kindle or paperback or hardcover. As always, if you want to follow myself and you're not already, then you can check me out on Instagram. My handle is @raspberry_ape. If you want to follow just the podcast, then it is @raspberryapepodcast. My website is raspberryape.com. If you want to check out some of my online content, such as grip training instructionals, sandbag training instructionals, or guillotine instructional, then check out apeacademyonline.com. As always, if you enjoyed this episode or any episodes or this podcast in general, then please feel free to share, to like, or even to leave a review. We always love that. Thank you very much for listening, guys, and I will catch you next time. Take it easy.